If you're looking at buying or leasing a new car, I can help by curating a customized list of vehicle recommendations that fit your needs. Visit drakemoscow.com/buying a car to see how I can help you find a new car. There exists, off the top of my head, only two automakers who produce regularly scheduled production models who don't make crossovers or SUVs. That would be McLaren, makes sense, and Chrysler, because they only sell one model, the Pacifica minivan. But Chrysler can kind of get away with this because they exist in the ether of the Stellantis family with many brands. Another brand that exists in that ether is Maserati, a brand that has long attempted to distinguish itself as an above luxury brand. They want to kind of sit above, higher up the pecking order than the Mercedes and BMWs of the world. And I think they've achieved that in a cultural sense. People believe and perceive Maseratis to be a step up, if not necessarily in a product sense. For example, this is the new Maserati Grecale, their new compact crossover. And I think it's a good example of how Maserati is definitely perceived to and priced at higher than luxury brands, but doesn't necessarily achieve that as an entire product package. Now, all of that being said, this Grecale Trofeo, which is the top of the line, most performance-oriented Grecale, is one of the most dynamic compact crossovers on the market. For reference, size-wise, also in the Stellantis family, this is smaller than an Alfa Romeo Stelvio, but larger than an Alfa Romeo Tonale. So it's a pretty medium-sized compact crossover, and its 3-liter twin-turbo V6, which is developed in-house by Maserati, produces an astounding 523 horsepower, which for this size of car is a lot, and this hits 60 in just 3.6 seconds. Now, you might be thinking, Drake, if this is one of the best driving compact crossovers on the market, why all of the hesitance? Why all of the quote-unquote hate? And it's because of this car's price. For reference, a 2024 BMW X3M competition costs about $85,000. Now, that model is a bit old, on its way out, and there's a new model coming in. But let's say, just for argument's sake, that the new X3M competition, whenever that comes out, the 2025, costs $95,000 even. This Maserati Grecale Trofeo, which by the way, this is a 23 model year, there were no changes for the 24 model year, costs $140,000. So $45,000 more than our hypothetical price for the new X3M competition. Yes, this is an incredible driving car, and yes, its badge and its color definitely stand out. We'll talk about the color more in a bit. But when you get into this car, it does not feel like 140 grand. Last week I was driving a BMW X6 M60i, which had a $111,000 sticker price, so about $29,000 less than this Grecale Trofeo. And that vehicle had an amazing interior. The tech, the finishes, and the build quality were all so impressive. Sitting here in the Grecale Trofeo, I am not as blown away. There are so many gloss black buttons, the window switches, the steering wheel controls, your gear selector even, and then there's a lot of touch screens as well. You have your infotainment system touchscreen, which is fine. It does CarPlay. It's not too impressive. And then a lower touchscreen to control all of your climate controls, as well as like your ride height for the adjustable air suspension, your ambient lighting, this little display up here. Sitting here, it doesn't really feel special. The only thing that kind of makes it feel special are the Maserati logos on the headrests, these column-mounted aluminum paddle shifters, which are amazing, and the start button on the steering wheel. It doesn't necessarily feel cheap, but it feels like Maserati cheaped out by just going screens and these gloss back buttons. Also, in this pretty intense sunlight, I can barely see what these buttons on the steering wheel do because they are backlit and it's just not bright enough. Now, there are a couple things about this interior that I do really like these aluminum paddle shifters. I also love this Sonos Faber audio system. It is one of the best speaker setups in the industry. They only work with Maserati and Pagani, so a really cool lineup of brands that they work with. Love that. The steering wheel itself is really nice. I do love the start button on the steering wheel, and your drive mode selector is also on the steering wheel, which is awesome. You can switch between, there's an off-road mode, comfort, GT, sport, and Corsa. And oh, this car sounds really good. That is one of the really impressive things about this vehicle. But there's just not as much character as there is in this vehicle's engine and kind of in the design of the exterior and the flare with this really bright color. I'm not getting a lot of soul on this interior. It's kind of drab. Now here in the second row, there actually is plenty of room for rear seat occupants. I'm 6'2", and this passenger seat is adjusted to further back than I would sit as the driver, and I still have enough knee room and foot room, and when I sit upright, enough headroom. You get heated seats for the outboard seats, USB-C and USB charger, your own climate control zone, and when I fold this down, a pair of cup holders, and it's fairly comfortable back here. You get to admire the full panoramic sunroof if the shade was open, but it's very hot out, so I have that closed. There are no manual peasant blockers, but in this size of car, I'm not really expecting that. Now, we must talk about this paint color. This is a yellow paint that has some fancy Italian name I'll put on the screen and not butcher the pronunciation of, but it is a $19,000 option on this Grecale Trofeo. So maybe it's a little unfair of me about harping about this car's $140,000 sticker price. This car without this color would be closer to $120,000, which is still an insane amount of money, but definitely more reasonable. This is a very pretty yellow, and I do think it makes the car stand out. I like how they paired it with these yellow brake calipers and the yellow stitching on the interior. I love the consistency and the commitment to the yellow, but I would not pay $19,000 for this yellow. That BMW X6 M60i that I was mentioning earlier that I drove last week was in a shade of green, Isle of Man green. I liked that green better than this yellow. Well, this yellow definitely has a lot of sparkle to it. That green, the Isle of Man green, had a bit more dynamicness to it. There was a bit more layers to it. I like this yellow, but it's not worth $19,000 in my opinion. All right, driving the Maserati Grecale Trofeo, and the most noticeable thing and the best thing about this car is its engine! Oh my God, these upshifts are so insanely dramatic in this car. This may not be a Ferrari V8, but it is still so good. I absolutely love this engine. I'm in GT mode right now, and now I'm behind a cop, so I'm not gonna do that again. And it's still so aggressive and loud and sporty. It's so much fun to drive this engine dynamically. And I also love how easy it is to shift the drive modes. It's right on the steering wheel, so I can just flick it over, and now I am in sport mode once more, and now I am in Corsa mode, the most aggressive drive mode of this car. It's really nice how easy it is to shift the drive modes. There's two more drive modes. There's a comfort mode, which I have altogether avoided, and an off-road mode, which I've also avoided. I've mainly been in GT or Corsa mode. Putting it into Corsa mode right now. Oh yeah, it sounds good. And you know, this is a small compact crossover, but it does still lean a bit in the corners. It doesn't remain as flat, even I feel like as that X6 M60i I was driving last week. You know, this is a taller vehicle, it is an SUV, and it struggles to, you know, mask that, I think. But then you put your foot down and the power is there right away. I mean, this thing makes 523 horsepower, and it is such a small car, and it really comes through. All right, putting my foot down here. Oh, it sounds so good on the upshifts. It's just so snappy and dramatic and loud. It makes you want to floor this car all day long, which I guess is the point, and you want to be driving a car that you want to floor all day long. And it definitely fits the Maserati ethos. You know, this car, especially in this bright yellow, is loud and exotic and flamboyant, and that exhaust note definitely matches that aesthetic. And it's pretty quick. When you put your foot down, you are launching forward. I believe Maserati says 0 to 60 happens in like 3.6 seconds, so it's definitely a pretty quick car and a snappy driving experience. All right, but dialing it back now into GT mode, which is kind of the normal mode. This is a good balance between performance driving and sporty driving, and the car definitely gets a bit softer. You know, this actually has a really good suspension. It's a adjustable suspension, so it kind of raises up and down based on what drive mode you're in, and when it's parked, it's squatted super low, and it looks amazing. But the car really softens up and becomes a really comfortable vehicle. Now, even though the interior is a little dull, oh, that sounds good. This car does still feel special, especially in this bright yellow paint. It looks exotic, and it gets looks because of that. The car just has an aesthetic about it that does exude different. It exudes exotic, Italian. People can tell that this isn't just another, you know, German luxury compact crossover. This one does stand out. So Maserati obviously was seeking to do that, and as a brand, they're always seeking to be a step above the Porsches, the BMWs, the Audis, the Mercedes of the world, and in an aesthetic sense, this does that. I also think this engine does that too. This has a lot more character than other engines in this class that I have driven. Like last week I was driving the X6 M60i, like I mentioned. That vehicle is obviously in a bit of a different category than this car, although it's less expensive than this vehicle. And that 4.4 liter twin turbo V8 that vehicle had was very clinical. It was very precise and exact and really interesting to drive in that sense. This has a lot more soul to it. It's not a Ferrari V8 anymore, and that was always a defining characteristic of Maserati's last generation products, but they've really done a great job. This is by far the best 3 liter twin turbo V6 I've driven, or twin turbo V6 in general. It's really impressive what they've been able to do with this vehicle and making it, you know, feel soulful. Even if this interior doesn't really deliver, I think a brighter color might help. I know the Folgore Maserati Gran Turismo has a much more interesting color palette with like a indigo turquoise color matched with the cream. So that would make the interior a lot brighter if they brought a color like that into this Grecale. But in other elements they do achieve. It's just the package as a whole, I think some elements are let down in making this vehicle feel more than the German competitors. The two elements that really deliver are the looks and the engine. Other than that, it falls a little short. So that's the Maserati Grecale Trofeo. This is a good-looking car with an incredible powertrain and great driving dynamics. But all of that being said, I do not think it justifies its $140,000 sticker price. That's just too much money for the size, performance, and luxury of this car. Now, the Grecale Trofeo in general has a starting price of $105,000, which seems a lot more reasonable to me, and I can see why people would be willing to spend that much money for this Maserati badge. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in my next video.